Some people glue the individual pieces after they've sprayed them with primer. I decided to try to print this or glue this ring together here before spraying it with primer. It just seemed to me if you're going to spray it with primer, it's going to get on all the areas that you glue other parts to, so you're going to want to cover those up, or you have to sand the paint off to get the glue. And I'm using the acrylic type glue to actually work. It has to come in contact with the bare plastic. So I'm hoping that this is gonna turn out okay and not be a problem to glue it first and then do the priming and painting. I've done a little research when I was trying to decide whether to do this or not, and found that a lot of people do actually do it this way, because then you can glue all of the body together, which means that, as you can obviously see, this is ring 1, and then ring 2 goes on top, and then ring 3 on top of that. Well, that's 3 rings all glued together, and they all have seams both vertically, where the individual pieces of the rings are glued together, and horizontally, where the rings are glued to each other. So all those seams need to be filled, and it's a lot of glue, and it seems to me that perhaps the better way to do it is to glue the body together first. Then you can check your seams and do some filling of the seams, then prime it, and then see where you're at with the primer to know which seams you need some more work on, and go from there. Instead of priming the individual pieces, gluing them together, then gluing the next ring of individual pieces that have been glued into the second ring on top of the first. It is easier, obviously, to take individual pieces out and spray them with primer and work on getting them in decent shape. But I figure if I keep doing what I have been doing with that red Bondo glazing putty, light coats of that, then I'm kind of doing that first, what essentially the first layer of filler primer would be doing. I'm fixing the real low spots. And also, as I'm pretty sure I've said before, if you see the areas of white plastic, those are high areas. And that's what concerns me more. If I spray it with primer filler, it's going to fill in the small indentations, but recesses, but anything that sticks out is just going to add more paint to that and make it stick out further. So it seemed to me maybe a better idea to try and get most of the areas that are sticking out sanded down before putting on that first coat of paint. So whether that's a good idea or not, I'm not sure, but that's kind of what I've decided to do. So that's ring 1. I had that long bar clamp. It's been in a closet for, I don't know, 10 plus years since the last whatever project I bought it for. I was trying to decide whether to glue this ring right side up or upside down, and then it just kind of, by trying both ways with the bar clamp, it just seemed this way, with the bars pressing down on these pieces and then pulling these two pieces together, it seemed to do the best job of keeping it level. When I had it flipped the other way and I pulled it tight, it seemed like it was adding a bow into it, like it was pulling these two pieces together too much. So I'm pulling it together, but not super duper tight, just enough that I could see my seams where the glue is we're definitely making good contact. But when I press on all four corners of this, they all seem to be pretty much level on this flat piece of 3/4 inch MDF that I've got it on. The pieces of paper are just so any glue that comes out between the seams, which won't stick to the board, it'll just stick to the paper. These little clamps are probably not necessary. Obviously the seam is right here and it runs up this thin piece. I did put glue on that piece, but it's so thin I don't know how much work the glue is going to do. I do plan on doing the welding like I did on both sides there, where I did welding with a soldering iron and more filament. I am going to be doing that on the other sides too, and I don't believe anything actually goes against these flat pieces. The greebles go in here, the hex ports and the power couplers and the side vents, they all get bolted in. They have nuts that drop into the pieces and then bolts go through here to secure them. So I don't think anything else runs up this seam. So I'm going to weld up these seams too, just to give it, again, that added strength. So I think it'll be okay. I test fitted ring 2, the two pieces that go here, and they fit fine. They fit really good, tight together, seam level. I didn't put the threaded rods into the holes. I just had them there, held together by hand, and they seemed to flush up against each other and looked pretty good. Most of the people say glue the rings separate, all three rings, and then stack them together. So I think that's what I'll probably do. What I haven't done is take ring 2 and just put it on the board by itself to make sure it forms a nice circle and the pieces seem flush. So I'll obviously be dry fitting that before I glue that, but that's where I am on ring 1 here. The skirt over here, I have done some Bondo between the pieces that I glued together. I probably shouldn't have glued, I'm not sure if it was a good idea to glue this before this or not. If you can see it, there's a special angled piece there, so these, when they go together really tight, and there's a really good spot right there where you can clamp it really tight, so they get glued really secure and fairly level and all that. Whereas these are just flush ends that need to go up against each other, and I'm not sure how to clamp that. There's a flat lip there. I might be able to put that big clamp across, but I'm not sure if that's going to cause it to bow out. I've tried putting one of these small clamps on this, which half of this is on that piece, and you can see the other half's over there. And it didn't work out too well, so gluing this together might be a bit of a challenge, but it should be alright. It's not a structural piece. The skirt goes underneath the ring, bolts come up through these holes into the ring, into a big plate that I have not printed that goes on top, and then the center foot gets bolted to that plate that I haven't printed yet. So I was going to spray this. This is a 2-part Bondo that I then sanded down. I was going to spray it, but then I realized, oh, wait a minute. Even though you've got the center foot, you can still kind of see this area when it's put together. I mean, you'd literally probably have to be down on your hands and knees to see it, but I decided to sand it a bit, and then I'm going to put some of that Bondo glazing putty on it in just a little bit from now. So it'll end up looking like this. And then I'll probably glue it. And then after I glue it, do the Bondo and the smoothing of the seams on both ends of that before painting or priming that. So that's where I am with that. Excuse me. And the other thing I've been doing, PETG. Yes, my nemesis, PETG. I've been doing some PETG. I've done this entire box of PETG. I have almost figured it out. I still have a problem with warping. Left side of the bed on my Prusa, anything that takes more than about 4 hours wants to warp on the left-hand side. This one right here, that would be this side. You can see us, might be able to see a small raised line here. So I think I might have shown the white piece I did that matches this. I'm doing 1 foot. This is what the drive system for the feet under the legs, and I'm doing one side in white and one side in black, just because I had white black, and I've also got a light gray PETG. So even though it's slightly warped, stronger than snot, there's no way this is going to break. So strength is really good, and I don't think the warp is gonna matter. My first layer is my other issue. This one looks great, and this one I probably should have reprint. Doesn't look so great. Yeah, it really wasn't sticking to the bed at all there. I needed to clean the bed, but I just let it go, and it actually corrected itself. And again, PETG is flexible. You can see it bending, but it's not going to break. It's strong. It just doesn't really look that appealing on the top. I could reprint that, but I think it's going to be fine. This turned out really well. This is the drive wheel that actually pulls him, or whatever, pulls, pushes, drives him. And it's really solid, printed really well. Didn't lift off the bed. I also did the gears. For example, here's the wheel gear. Come on. Here we go. Wheel gear fits inside the wheel. And then there's a middle gear. Then there's the gear that goes around the motor. These are all herringbone gear. I printed them all at 0.2 resolution. So you have nice smooth gears to reduce noise. And they move really smooth. Very impressed with it. Happy that I got all that to print. And yeah, it's only things that take about 4 hours or more that seem to warp. The small stuff I seem to have down. One thing is, and it sounds silly, but clean the bed with like Dawn dishwashing soap. If stuff doesn't stick, like here, take the textured PEI bed out of the printer and go over it with a washcloth with dish soap. Before I had been using paper towels, and I think that the washcloth works better because you can push at it better, and it gets into the textured sheet better to clean it. And then rinse it off with really hot water. And then prints seem to stick pretty well for several prints until you start having problems where they lose their adhesion. Use isopropyl alcohol in between printing. Like this, for example, has got a really nice first layer on it. So that seems to help, although that doesn't fix my warping problem. I still have a warping issue. But this entire box here was printed. I did have a nozzle clog. I think it was after I had just started with this. I ended up swapping out the nozzle for another nozzle. But I got, this is like, I think all of the frame pieces, and well, except the biggest one, and all of the drive pieces. So if it's not all of them, it's like 90% of them. Although I noticed if you buy the Vex wheels, if you don't make the omnidirectional wheels yourself, if you buy the option that's out there to purchase, it looks like the piece that I just threw on the floor. It looks like there's a special version of that and this. There's two of them, a skinny one and a fatter one. There's a different version of this with a much larger hole if you choose to buy wheels instead of printing your own wheels. And I haven't decided whether to do that or not. It's a lot of money, but if I'm having this much problem with PETG, the thought of printing a flexible filament for the Omni wheels is a little daunting. So that's what I've been doing this week, a lot of PETG. Things like, this was I think 7 or 8 hours. This was probably like 5 hours, so just lots of them. And then I've also got these all done in white. So both of the left and right wheels are done. And what just finished on the printer, this, which almost out of filament. This is the part that has been causing me so many headaches, and I never thought I'd be able to print in PETG, and I'm still not convinced I can print it in PETG. This print is a 16, almost 17 hour print. I've got it 0.28 resolution, 40% infill, triangle infill. This part is angled. It was failing on my other prints. I did not use a support this time. I just let it print. This is a piece of this discarded support material from one of my failed runs that I just threw under there thinking, well, maybe that'll keep some of the sagging down. So that's not actually part of the print. That's just part of my leftover garbage. You can see my problem. I have used helper discs. I used small ones because this print's pretty close to the edge of the bed. So, oh yeah, 16 hours, 35 minutes. So, yeah, even with helper discs, the stuff warps. Even with helper discs and blue tape on top of the helper discs, the stuff warps. So I'm hoping that this didn't warp enough to make it unusable. Now, again, it seems to warp on the left side, whether that's because it doesn't heat up as well on the left side, or the left side of the bed is not quite level, and for some reason the auto leveling isn't adjusting for it properly. I don't know. But, I mean, I actually got this thing to print, which I never even got past this stage before, because I had been putting supports under here and it was just failing on the supports because of warping filament. Now you can see, probably see there, that there's still, it doesn't look good under there, but people say it doesn't have to look good under there. You can just pull off the strings, detach them, and you'll be fine. So I'm hoping that's the case, because yeah, it definitely doesn't look good under there. This is where the scooter motor attaches, and this is where you have to use support. Right in here, there's support material because this part has nothing underneath it. This part clamps the scooter motor in place, so this part has to be flexible to go around the motor and then be pinched in place so it stays in place. So that part has to have supports. This part doesn't. So brim, like I said, I've got a brim on this. I've got helper discs, and it's still blue tape, and it still warps off the bed. Whoa. Okay, so there we go. Here's my largest PETG print ever, and hopefully the bit of warp on this side, which I don't know if the camera shows it. Obviously, looking through the camera, I can't really tell. But hopefully any warp there is small enough, combined with the flexibility of PETG, that the parts that bolt together, because this does not use any glue. It's another cool thing about Michael Baddeley's design, is that this doesn't use any glue. It all just snaps together and then bolts together mechanically. So hopefully, if it is a little bit bowed, it's going to be small enough that the rest of the pieces, when they're all bolted together, it'll straighten itself out and it'll be okay. The other side of this plate, which I was able to print successfully, I don't think that one warped. If it did, it was just barely. So the other side of this plate that bolts to this one has a hole for the motor, the rest of the motor to pass through. And then in between, there are blocks that go in between the two plates that are sandwiched together. Those gears, the motor gear goes in there because that's where the motor goes. That's the middle gear goes in there. And must be the wheel gear that goes in there, or the wheel gear might, well, no, the wheel gear has to touch the wheel. I don't know. I don't know. All I know is that I wasted so much time in filament printing this that now that I finally got it, hopefully they're right about this side doesn't have to be perfect, because this side looks absolutely terrible. I know that it's beveled so that it fits in the foot shell. So hopefully it doesn't have to be like some kind of super strong deal. I think that giant block that I showed, sorry about the light camera movement if I'm making anyone sick. Again, this is one side. I don't know if it's right or left. This is one side of the foot. This comes from another, so this might not, this isn't the one that actually goes with this. But I believe that piece goes there, or there's another one just like that one that's thinner, and it goes there. So you can see the holes. So I think between the holes and the bolts that go through, that's why it doesn't really matter if that angled piece isn't the prettiest, because there's enough of a giant support block of plastic behind it. And then this, again, I don't know which direction this goes, and this is from a different foot than this. But this piece here goes in here. So you can see it's starting to go. I'm not sure if I've trimmed this all the way. And again, doing it one-handed, it's supposed to be pretty tight clearances, so it's not super loose. So I'm assuming that that's gonna snap in if I was putting the white one in here with the white piece. So it should be okay. I'm hoping that little bit of warp isn't going to be a problem. One other thing as I swing back to the printer here. One other thing is I have been printing PETG, my temperatures. The first layer, I have the nozzle at 245 and the bed at 85. And then for the rest, I have the nozzle at 240 and the bed at 80. I think I'm going to up the bed by 5 degrees on both, So it's 90 degrees for the first layer and 85 for the rest. And then I guess I'll try to print the other side of that, since I got that one side to print. I do have an unopened roll of light gray PETG. Obviously the white there is pretty much finished. I've got about that much left from the other roll of white, and then the black I've got I think like 2, maybe 3 times that much left. Enough to do some small pieces, but nowhere near enough to print that large 16.5 hour motor mount piece out of. So another thing while I'm on the subject, this filament is eSun PETG. This filament is 4 years old. When I got my Robo 3D, my first printer, I read that PETG was great stuff, and it's better than PLA, and it doesn't warp, and it sticks to the bed like crazy, and so I bought a spool of it, and I could never get the stuff to stick to the bed on my Robo 3D. And at that time I didn't know about filaments absorbing moisture from the air. So I had it in the cardboard box it came in, which has a cutout open to the air that lets you look inside and see the actual filament, so you can see how much is left and what color it is. I left it in that box on a shelf for, I'd probably say, at least 6 months before I put it into a dry box, a box with desiccant that has a seal to keep air out. So it spent over 3 years just hanging out in my dry box, and at least 6 months absorbing moisture in the atmosphere. So I didn't even try to print with it until I ran it through my new dehydrator. So I put it for 13 hours into the dehydrator at, well, according to the dial, they're not supposed to be that accurate, but at around 60 centigrade for 13 hours. And then this filament actually printed better than the brand new filament that I printed all the other stuff with, which is, I can never remember the name, Overture PETG. It actually seemed to print better. Now, I don't know if that's because the temperatures, different colors like different temperatures. Maybe this white, like the 240 temperature, better than the black filament did, and that made it print just a little bit better. But I seem to have less problems with this white eSun PETG than I did the Overture PETG. So yeah, not exactly saving money, I suppose, buying a $70 food dehydrator. And then off Craigslist I bought 12 extra trays for $25 so that I could make trays for drying filament without using the original trays, so it still can be used for an actual food dehydrator with the original trays, and they won't have any plastic outgassing chemicals, if there are any, that stick to the trays, and still have, what, I think 5 trays or 6 trays left over that I don't even really need. So kind of silly. I could have probably just bought however many I needed, but I also have about a 4-year-old roll with just a little bit of eSun PLA Plus. So between those 2 spools, that's maybe $15 worth of filament that I saved by spending $95 on a dehydrator. But hey, I can use that dehydrator on any filament, and it can be used as a dehydrator, so that's a good thing too. I think that's about it for this video. The one other thing, I won't swing around and show it because you're probably seasick enough for me moving the camera around. I have begun sanding on the body ring 2 pieces. So again, like I said when I started this talking about ring 1, when I look at the pieces right off the printer, I can see some areas that are raised, right? Probably ringing, vibrations from the printer that are transferred to the print. And so all the way across the print, there'll be, anywhere from one layer to, 5 or 6 layers or whatever that are higher than the rest of the print. So I'm taking sandpaper by hand and sanding those down as much as I can to get them near flush. And again, my theory is that by doing that by hand, it's more sanding. I'm also using a machine. I've got a Dremel, I think it's the E6000 that I've had, again, for like 15 plus years. And I'm using that as well, just to kind of go over it. At least I did with Ring 2, just as an experiment. And I don't know if I'll continue because I don't think that there's much advantage to that on the bare plastic, as opposed to just taking like 150 grit sandpaper by hand and getting the raised areas down. So yeah, get the raised areas down so that next I can start gluing the other rings together and then doing some priming. So may not look like a lot of progress, but literally several days of almost non-stop PETG printing on this Prusa. The Tivo Tornado has been resting after I printed the last piece of the third ring of the body, so all the major parts to the rings of the body have been printed. Now that I printed that one big motor frame that finished printing while I was filming, I still have the other side to do. Hopefully I'll get lucky with that, and that one will print as well, or even better if I up the temperatures on the bed a little bit. Maybe it'll stick better and won't come off. But yeah, major progress on getting the drive units for the feet and getting the body parts printed. I'm not going to start printing the legs until I get the body parts glued together and start doing more processing on that. I think I've said before, I've got all the greebles printed that go around the body, and all of those need to be sanded and primed and filled and primed and sanded and painted as well. So I've got plenty of work to do and not that much room, so I don't really see much advantage to getting the legs printed now when there's really nowhere for me to put them at the moment, and I have enough work to keep me busy that it's just no advantage. The PETG I wanted to do just because it's PETG and they're relatively small, anywhere from 15 minutes to, well, this one was 19 hours, but most of them are 7 hours or much less, 2-3 hours for the gears each. So it gives me something to be printing, and I can go out and do some sanding, come back in and check on it. And I kind of want to get the PEG out of the way because I don't like it. I mean, it's a great material. I like how it turns out when it works right. It's just so finicky, and I have to babysit the first layer, and if it doesn't stick, then take the sheet off and wash it out in the sink and then bring it back, and it's good for 3-4 prints, 5 prints, and then it stops sticking and I have to wash it again, and it's just not, the hassle is not worth it. So the center leg is supposed to use PETG, so there's still quite a bit of stuff to print. I was actually surprised. As I said, the white 1 kilogram roll of PETG I finished, except for about this much, maybe double that. The black one is 95% finished, and the center leg will use, I think, at least half of the gray one, plus that 16.5 hour motor mount that I just printed that I have one more to do. Means that I'm going to probably use most of the gray spool. So that's 3 full spools. Well, okay, this eSun was a little bit over half. So let's say 2.5 spools of PETG, no, 3.5 spools of PETG, and there's still the wheels, the Omni wheels. If I decide to print those and not buy them, those things use some PETG as well. And I think there's a few other things that should be printed in PETG that I think I'm just going to print in PLA Plus, which I'm going to move from the PLA that I've been using to PLA Plus when I get to the legs. And the plate that goes in the middle of that supports the third leg, they want that in PETG, but that's so huge that the only printer I can print it on is the TiVo Tornado. And that's problematic just in the fact that I've never printed PETG over there. For all I know, it actually might work better on the glass bed, but I've also heard that it could stick so well to a glass bed that it pulls pieces of the glass out. And that's like a $60 borosilicate glass bed that you clamp to the TiVo Tornado bed. And I really don't want to ruin that. So that's why I've been trying to print all the small stuff I can on the Prusa. So yeah, I think the basically that middle plate that supports the center leg and the shoulders that I don't even have files for, the shoulders, which are supposed to be printed in one piece like this center plate, but they won't fit on a 300 millimeter bed, so you have to find the files that are cut and then print them and glue them together. I think I'm just going to go ahead and do those in PLA Plus with 5 or 6 perimeters, probably at least 50% infill. It's going to use a ton of plastic, but it still seems to me it'd be easier to do it that way with PLA Plus than to do it in PETG. And because my droid is not going to be driving around that much, I think it's going to be absolutely fine. And if either one of those parts crack, they are parts that you can take out. They're not glued in, so you can take them out and then replace them. So if I get it together and it develops a crack or something, then it's okay. I'll have to figure out how to print it in PETG. So current plan is to start ordering PLA Plus for this centerpiece and for the legs. I still have, let's see, I still have one full spool of printed solid white PLA, which is what I did body rings 2 and 3. Body ring 2, part of body ring 2 is in here, and body ring 3 is in there. So I still have one full spool plus I think like a third of the printed solid white. I have one full spool of Xyltech Clear and Xyltech Red, and I have the free, the Prusa Silver kilogram that they give you with the Prusa printer. So that's over 4 full spools of regular PLA for printing the leg greebles or anything that's not structural on the leg, like the whole horseshoe. That whole thing can be done in regular PLA, doesn't need to be PLA Plus. And again, it'll help me reduce the cost because the Xyltech I got with the TiVo Tornado, I think I mentioned that before, really good price on the TiVo Tornado with 8 spools of filament, one that I gave away when I sold my Robo 3D, so I had 7 spools of PLA. The green one I used making parts for the TiVo Tornado as well as some other projects. So that was 6 spools of PLA that I didn't have to pay for because I consider it free, because the TiVo Tornado Plus filament was $175 and the TiVo by itself is worth more than twice that because it was brand new. So yeah, just taking the cost down. Also the PETG, somebody ordered PETG by mistake. They meant to order PLA, so I got the Overture black, white, and light gray spools, $30. So that's $10 a spool. So that's saved me $30 there because they're about $20 a spool. So I'm saving some money on filament, which is great because I'm spending more money on paint and filler and printer parts than I thought I was going to. So that's it for this week. Yep, that's it.